agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, the place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Trey Orndorff, a political scientist at Oklahoma Christian University, and I am joined again for this midweek supporters exclusive show with you, Ken. Ken, how are things going?
Oh, it's so great to be back, Trey. It's great to have you back.
Yeah, it is. Well, and I'll tell you, one of the biggest disappointments that I kind of faced was we had just started doing what I thought was this really good idea from one of our executive producers, which was, why don't you guys, originally the thought was we're just going to read through the Constitution. But that didn't seem like enough to me, right? And so as we talked about it more in our groups, we thought, hey, why don't we actually kind of analyze the Constitution as we go along? And since obviously you're a law scholar and I'm adjacent to law, as a matter of fact, I do teach a con law class at the undergraduate level. You know, we thought, okay, this would be the way to go through. So, of course, then, Mike gets to have all the fun last time. And I don't get to be a part of that. So I think what we're going to do, Ken, is we're going to kind of approach this in the way that you've even said that you've approached it with your students, although maybe not your first way of doing it, is we're going to kind of zip a little bit forward. We've been working in Article 1, but we're going to kind of start with the end of Article 1 first, which is at the end of Article 1, Section 8, which is the necessary and proper clause, so that we can then come back and either in this episode or probably even more likely in future episodes, get through some of those really important powers. So, for example, credit, you guys have already talked about commerce, but we'll get to those. But Ken, this last phrase in Article 1, Section 8, we're kind of going to do what we've done in the past, which is just kind of read this and then have some conversations about it. But it says this, and it's a really, really important one. It says, quote, "To make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers, and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States or in any department or officer thereof," end quote. And what really makes this a big deal is in part there's four major kinds of powers that come out of the Constitution, but the two major ones that come out of Article 1, Section 8 kind of broadly constituted, or you have your enumerated powers, or that list of powers, for example, to regulate commerce with foreign nations, as Ken, you and Mike were talking about last time. But then you have what we have as being not enumerated powers. You have the implied powers, which come from the necessary and proper clause. And this is actually a huge amount of debate about this early in constitutional history. This is the first constitutional issue in many ways, and it is definitely happening while the ink is still wet on the paper, because you kind of have two groups. On the one hand, you have Thomas Jefferson and others who want a real strict construction of what the necessary and proper clause is going to be. And then you have another group who kind of center around Alexander Hamilton, who we sometimes think of as being a broad construction, who wanted to be able to read a lot of potential powers in here. As a matter of fact, one of the earliest of these, as I was hinting, is this question of the national bank, which kind of corresponds with a number of those enumerated powers and eventually culminates in McCulloch v. Maryland. So Ken, what are the important elements of the necessary and proper clause?
Yeah, well, it's a bit of a sphinx. It's a bit of a mystery, because the structure, the basic structure of the framers' design for Congress was that you use the phrase enumerated powers, and that's exactly it. They made a list of powers that Congress has, and the idea was that this would be a limited government because we already had state governments. So state governments are governments of general jurisdiction. They can basically legislate on any subject. And the idea was that if we're overlaying a United States government on top of that, the United States government would only be able to legislate on certain subjects, and on subjects where there was concurrent jurisdiction, things that the United States government could legislate on, and states also could legislate on, then under the Supremacy Clause, federal law would be supreme. Federal law would trump. But correspondingly, there'd be a lot of areas that state laws could legislate on that didn't fall within Congress's enumerated powers. And so states would therefore be supreme in those areas because they would be the only competent legislature in those areas. So the big structure here is that there's only certain things that Congress is allowed to legislate about, and those things are listed on a list. And so most of Article 1, Section 8 is the list. It just gives us the list of things that Congress can do. It can regulate interstate commerce. It can make intellectual property law. It can make immigration law. It can make bankruptcy law. It can make an army. And there's this long list there. But then when we get to the end of the list, again, where the structure is supposed to be, these are the things that Congress can do, and it can't do anything else unless it's on the list. Well, the last thing on the list is that Congress can make all laws which are necessary and proper for carrying into execution all the other laws. And in fact, not only just all the other laws, but Congress can even make all laws which are necessary and proper for carrying into execution other powers that are vested in the other departments, in the executive branch and the judicial branch. Not just the powers that are vested in the Congress. And so it's sort of, in a way, it threatens to undermine the whole structure, right? You have a structure where you say Congress can only pass laws about things that are on the list. Here's the list. The list is a lot of, some of them are pretty big things like regulating commerce, but, ultimately it's a list that, is finite. But then when you get to the end of the list, and everything else that's necessary and proper. And so,
that's a great question because, one of the big areas we've talked about this in earlier shows, right? This was one of the areas where you have issues with what the Federalists end up calling the Anti-Federalists. They thought that this would get used too extensively. And so as a matter of fact, two of our amendments are purportedly to kind of maybe put some guardrails around the Sphinx. I don't know, in the 9th and 10th Amendment, although it doesn't end up working out quite that way. That's one of the questions there, right?
Right. I mean, in fact, the whole Bill of Rights, in a way, not just the 9th and 10th, because Madison was of the view that it was a bad idea to have a Bill of Rights because Madison said, look, the way I've structured the Article 1, Section 8, there's only certain things that Congress can do, and it can't do the things that aren't on the list. So, for instance, Congress can't abridge freedom of speech or free exercise of religion or anything like that because it doesn't have any enumerated power to regulate speech or to regulate religion. So it already can't do that. And Madison said if we said that there's a list of things that Congress can't do, then people are going to start thinking, well, then Congress can do everything else. And so that would kind of, undermine the idea of limited enumerated power. So he actually thought, all of that would just create an unfortunate negative implication that Congress could do anything that's not prohibited. But the Anti-Federalists did insist on a Bill of Rights. And as you point out, they especially insisted that it include a 9th and 10th Amendment. And the Ninth Amendment says that the enumeration in the rest of the Bill of Rights of certain rights shouldn't be taken to deny or disparage other rights that are retained by the people. So they're sort of trying to remind us that we have a lot more rights besides the rights that are listed in the Bill of Rights. But I guess they thought that it wasn't necessary to specify what those other rights were because I think they thought the idea was, well, everything that Congress doesn't have an enumerated power to regulate are the things that are all of our other rights. But that is kind of, all of that is in great tension with this idea of having a necessary and proper clause. And some of the framers were quite opposed to it. Jefferson really hated it. He called it the sweeping clause, and he thought it basically undid all the work that the structure of limited enumerated powers did. But the first really great interpretation of it from the court doesn't come until, as you said, the case of McCulloch versus Maryland around 1819. And it's an early and still highly influential case about how to interpret the meaning of the necessary and proper clause.
Yeah, and in fact, not a little bit high. I mean, it has been cited over 6,000 times. As a matter of fact. Now, but before we move forward, because we need to get in and chat about McCulloch, but what I need to let everybody know is that at this point, though, we've actually reached the end of our midweek supporters exclusive preview. So if you want to get the rest of the show with myself and with Ken, well, it's going to be time for you to become a supporter. And we would love to have you as a supporter. If you haven't already done it, it's easy to do. What you're going to do is you're going to head to patreon.com/politicsguys. Or if you like, you can go to Venmo and we're at Politics Guys. You can also support us through PayPal, and all of those different ways of supporting the show are on politicsguys.com/support. So again, if you want to continue along in this, the preview's over, but we'd love to have you for the full show. Head to politicsguys.com/support and get this right now so that you can finish it. Not only that, but you can finish it without me talking about ads, which is also wonderful. Now, again, if you're not in a position to support the show, but you're, you've been wet and you want to know a little bit more, wetting your whistle a little bit, all you got to do is reach out to Mike at politicsguys.com and let him know, and we'll get you set up with the full show. So again, there's a lot of other really cool things you get. This isn't the only thing you get. It's one of the things you get. You get access to Discord groups. You get the different levels of benefits and gear. But again, head to politicsguys.com/support for all of that. If you've got any kinds of questions, you can always send them to us at mail@politicsguys. Otherwise, I'm just here to remind you that the executive producers of the Politics Guys are Bruce Johnson, Wilma Marino, Andra Masker, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, and Don Oglesby. I hope you'll get the full episode by heading to politicsguys.com/support.